Welcome to Rebels Speak and Be Encouraged. And today I'm thinking, I was just praying and seeing, like, sometimes when we're trying to get home, we're trying to get back. We're trying to get returned and restored. And the terrain is rough. The ground's tricky. And God says, I lead you well. God has your hand. God's holding you. That's what I was saying. God's taking you by the hand and leading you through the tricky bits of the path, the places where maybe the path's a little obscure, like when you're hiking and you're having to kind of take a step that's steeper and further than it feels like you're comfortable, and you take someone's hand and they help you get kind of from height A to height B. Maybe there's water there and the rocks are slippery. And God, I want to encourage you, God has your hand. God's restoring you, and God doesn't look at you and say, I've restored you, get over with it. That I really hope you don't hear that voice. I hope you don't hear an impatient voice. I hope you hear a voice of love, and a voice of concern, and a voice of care, a for you, I'm so very for you voice, a voice so very for you. And this is Jeremiah. I was thinking it's Jeremiah 38, but it's Jeremiah 31:8. And it's they're being returned, they're being restored, they're coming back. Jeremiah's looking to when they will come back, a returned and a restored people. Long ago, Yahweh said to Israel, I have loved you, my people, with an everlasting love. With unfailing love, I have drawn you to myself. That part of you that's yearning to be with God, God's drawing you as well. This isn't a test where you're the only actor. You're the only one that needs to come up with all the right answers. You're here, and the yearnings of your heart for God, God's been drawing you to God. You're not abandoned. And I don't say that tritely. You're not abandoned. God's not saying, okay, here it is. Here's the map. Get to my door. Let me know when you're there. He's come and he's drawn you to him, and he's leading you, and he's preserving your life as you follow. And part of the path is very slippery, and you feel like you fall down a lot, and there's something about that failure that's frustrating. But God's with you, and like a good parent, God's leading you and helping you find the right place to put your feet, establish your step well. God has so much time for you. I feel like all the time in the world. There's no time's not your enemy, it's your friend. And God's working through time on behalf of some who have felt very scattered. And in the midst of that sense of scatteredness, God is not like local, just, I don't know, like we have the word scattered, it can just be like kind of ditzy. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where there's just been parts of your life that are spread out in ways that your life narrative feels so scattered. The story of your life, of who you are, of your journey, like who's keeping hold of it. And there's something in you that's wanting your storyline to prosper. And there's not one part of your storyline that God's dropped. There's not one part of your journey that God isn't holding precious and dear in God's hand. You're going to find in God all of the story of you is established and well cared for. Like as if someone had a jar and they kept all the treasures. God treasures your storyline. God holds it dear. I will be the God of all the families of Israel, and they will be my people. I will care for the survivors as they travel through the wilderness. You in your survival, God's caring for you as you travel through the wilderness, coming near. God's got you. He's got your hand. He cares for you. I will again come to give rest to the people of Israel. And then I kind of jumped around there. I have loved you, my people, with an everlasting love, with unfailing love. I have drawn you to myself. I will rebuild you, precious, precious daughter. I will rebuild you. And then I'm going to jump down here. Listen to this message from Yahweh. You nations of the world, proclaim it to the distant coastlands, the most furthest, the furthest away, the furthest away. Yahweh, who scattered his people, will gather them together and watch over them as a shepherd does his flock. A shepherd watches and protects and keeps those sheep safe. For the Lord Yahweh has redeemed Israel from those too strong for them. You and I are being redeemed from enemies that have been too strong for us. We're being redeemed from difficult places. We're being restored from difficult journeys. We're being restored from brokenheartedness. We're being restored from fears. We're being restored from failure. We're being restored where deception led us wrong, where we've been deceived and there's been genuine deception. We're being restored. Ooh, you're being restored. Those hairs are counted on your head as a sign of God so deeply interested in you. I feel some are being restored from places where you've been held hostage. And I feel you've been held hostage far too long. And God's working in that storyline as a song of redemption, where God has offered you God's hand, and God's holding your hand and getting you like out of the woods, right? Wizard of Oz, out of the woods. God's getting you out of the woods. I will bring them from the north and from the distant corners of the earth. I will not forget the blind and lame, the expectant mothers and women about to give birth. A great company will return. And I'm just going to leave it at that. The blind and the lame, the expectant mother, the one about to give birth. These are the ones that are left behind and forgotten. It's a contrast of how they left when they were escaping. When they were being sent out, just kind of like the chaos of refugee status, just that chaos, where folk just in the flurry, I guess I should say flurry, get left behind. The blind and the lame and the woman in labor that can't run, can't hide for cover. And God's contrasting that with return, with coming home, being reestablished, being found, being called by name, being cherished in our blindness and our lameness. Situations and circumstances that we can't get around, they're upon us, right? When you're in labor, it's upon you. It's upon you. You need grace. And sometimes there's realities that have no grace. They have no grace. The cruelty of the world can have no grace for the things that are happening in and through us. And God has that reached out hand that says, I have time. I see you. I see your need. I see your vulnerability. I see your brokenheartedness. What it's like to be left behind, too. Like when folks can't wait for you. They can't wait for you to catch up. They can't wait for you. You've been abandoned on the journey. God walks up and says, I'm most interested in you. That can be true when you're older, too, right? You're walking more slowly. God's most interested in you. God's got God's hand held out to stabilize you. God's got a path ahead. He's not walking you off a cliff. God's providing. Know who you are in Christ. Even if you don't fully believe it, just declare it, just to speak it over that, just speak it. I have a sound mind because God is holding my hand and has established my feet well. God has a sound path, and I'm traveling on that sound path. And because I'm on a sound path, solid, not moving, not shifting sand, not diminishing returns, I can have a sound mind, even if I'm a little afraid. I can say, no, I'm stable because God is stable. Even if my mind right now doesn't feel fully stable, I'm stable because the God of love, the God of the universe, the creator that's created everything, is stabilizing me. And in his hands, I stand stable. In the logic of God's love, I'm held stable. And even if my mind is racing and, I don't know, deceiving me, that's not what I'm looking at. This morning when I woke up, I felt God just yet again. Isaiah 41:12, don't look back. And it says you'll look back in vain, you won't find your enemies. But I felt God say to me, I want you to start always living forward. Like kind of how I make sense of my life is kind of through the backward view. Like, okay, what's the situation? What's the circumstance? Where are we? And I felt like, nope. And I had to, yet again, I had to stand up, and I often have to walk. When there's something in my inertia that's not looking up, I have to walk and sing a song. And I'm trying to remember what song it was, but I just kind of sing. I don't know. I'll just have a chorus, an older chorus, and I just sing it and sing it and sing it. And then that goodness just fills. Been a little lonely lately. That goodness fills that loneliness. God's boldness and goodness, I'm going to say goldness, that goodness and boldness of God, that reality that's greater than I, that reality that loves me, that reality that has me where I am, not because not for reasons that aren't good. That assurance of God's goodness, that assurance of God's mercy in the midst of my loneliness, in the midst of, I feel to say this, devastated places where you look around and just there's devastation. God's got you. He's got you before and behind. It's not mythical. Reach out and take that hand. There's an invitation of love that wants to walk with you. Don't cut that hand off. Don't reject that overture. Don't reject it. Don't reject it. Take it. Walk with the love that knows you better than all others and that wants to lead you into that green pasture, that gentle water. Be blessed.